guys! I wanted to do a comparison video of the Hobonichi Techo and the Jibun Techo because these are two planner brands that have a lot in common, and the Jibun Techo is often cited as a competitor to the Hobonichi, and because I think a lot of people are much more familiar with the Hobonichi than the Jibun Techo, it might be helpful if you're trying to decide between the two to be able to see in depth what the similarities and differences between them are. So on the Hobonichi side, you'll see I have three different planners. We've got the A5, the cousin, the Weeks, and the A6, or the original. Whereas on the Jibun Techo side, I've only got one. And I guess that's one of the first major differences between them, is that the Hobonichi comes in these three different variants, whereas the Jibun Techo only comes in two, and they're actually, as far as I can tell, pretty much the same except for the size and the color. So for the Hobonichi, just very quickly, the A5 and the A6 are almost identical, except that the A6 is obviously half the size of the A5. The only other difference between them is that the A5 has a weekly section, whereas in the A6 it doesn't have one, although you can buy a separate weekly insert that you can put into the cover. So for most of this video, I'm going to be focusing on the A5 because it's got the weekly insert, it's got the weekly section, which renders it much more similar to the Jibun Techo. But all of the issues that I'll be talking about for the A5, apart from the weekly, also apply to the A6, just in smaller format, if that makes sense. And then you've also got the Weeks, which is a B6 slim size, and it's a week on one page with gridded note paper on the other side, and then it has about 70 pages of notes in the back. So that's the Hobonichis. The Jibun Techo, on the other hand, has two different sizes. A5 slim, which is this one, so you can see that compared to the Hobonichi cousin, the A5 Hobonichi, it's about the same size in terms of height, but it's quite a bit narrower, so hence the slim. And it also comes in a B6 slim, which is the same size as the Weeks. So it's comparable in that respect if you compare the B6 slim, which I don't have unfortunately, to the Weeks. Now, I said there's also a difference in color. There are two different versions. I don't know if they're available in both the A5 Slim and the B6 Slim, or just the A5 Slim. I think they're available in both, but I might be wrong. And that this is the standard one, which is very colorful. And then there's also a version called the Biz, which is just black and white. But other than that, the layout is the same. So I don't have the Biz version, but you can kind of assume that everything that I'm showing you is the same for that, except for the colors. So there are quite a few more options, I guess, in terms of layouts and sizes for the Hobonichi than the Jibun Techo. The Jibun Techo is like kind of one layout, and it just has the two different sizes. So we'll start with the overall look of the planners and then go on to the specifics of what they have inside and how they resemble and differ from each other. So firstly, I think the main difference between them, if you look at the overall structure, is that each of the Hobonichis is just one single book, whereas the Jibun Techo is made up of 3 books. So you can see here, you've got 1, 2, 3, and I'll show you in depth in a minute what that looks like. But even before that, you've got how the outside looks. So the Hobonichi A5 and A6, you've got this one book, which is quite thick, made out of a pretty thick, sturdy card cover, which you could really carry around on its own. It's not quite a hardback, but kind of, I'd say borderline between hard and softback. And then you can also get these optional covers, all kinds of different covers. This one isn't actually Hobonichi brand. I got this from an Etsy shop, which I'll link down below. But there are lots of different designs and types of covers that you can get and switch in and out. And it's designed to be used with one of these covers, but any A5 cover will fit it. Same for the A6. And the Weeks is also independent, self-standing, and it comes in a variety of different hardback and a couple of softback covers. This is a hardback one. The hardback ones are usually pretty bendy, so they're quite flexible, but you can see this is an independent unit. It's not designed to be used with a cover necessarily, although you can put it in an optional cover. Hobonichi doesn't sell very many covers, but there are quite a few on Etsy. You could put it in a Fodori, etc. But it's designed to be used independently, you know, if you want to. Whereas by contrast, the Jibun Techo comes like this in a package with these 3 different notebooks, which to my mind are more like traveler's notebook inserts. So you have this one quite thin floppy paperback called the Life Notebook, which I'll discuss a bit more later. Then you have the planner itself, which again has a kind of floppy-ish cardstock. This is the cover, so it's still, you know, relatively sturdy, but it's definitely much more paperback-ish. It's very bendy. You can take the whole thing and move it back and forth like that. So compared to the Hobonichi, it's a lot thinner, and it's also less durable, so I wouldn't want to use this on its own. You can see here that the bookmarks are not bound into it. It's not exactly unfinished, but it feels a little bit more like it's designed to be inside this cover than the Hobonichi, if you see what I mean. And then it's got this third booklet, which again is just like a sort of soft, floppy notebook. It also comes with this Shitajiki pencil board, which the Hobonichi doesn't. You can order them separately on the Hobonichi website, but this one just comes with it if you get this package. And so they all go inside this plastic cover, and the cover has some credit card pockets, and it also has this blue sheet. I don't want to dismember this too much because otherwise it will take me forever to put it all back together. You can see it just has this thin paper sheet that says 2017 on it. So you could actually take all of these out and put them into a traveler's notebook, which is what I prefer to do. I don't usually keep mine in here. I just put it back into this for the video so you could see what you'd get if you ordered one. But I prefer to keep it in this, which is a Webster's Pages traveler's notebook. And these are perfect because they actually seem to be an A5 slim size. They're not listed like that, but there's only one size that they come in, and it's just perfect for all of these. So to me, if that makes sense, these are much more like traveler's notebook inserts, even the planner, which is the thickest one, whereas the Hobonichi is much more of a bound planner. Obviously this is bound as well, but this just feels much more like an independent book, and the Weeks does as well, and the A6. So I think that's the first major difference. I personally like the feel of a big, chunky, sturdy planner more than the traveler's notebook insert feel. And I also like having everything in one book as opposed to 3 different books. But that's totally personal preference. So throughout this video I am going to be giving my opinions on which features I like better in each planner, but obviously none of this is objective. This is just my impression. So it's absolutely personal preference, and a lot of people like the traveler's notebook system. So to me this just feels much more like that than these do. The other thing is I don't really like plastic covers. So this plastic cover is quite convenient because it's got a lot of credit card slots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can also put things in here, and then it's also got this pocket on the outside, and then it's got another pocket on the back. I just don't like the look of plastic covers. I much prefer either the hardback Weeks or the separate covers that you get from Hobonichi. So I kind of like the feel of a nice sturdy cover, which is why I prefer using this with the Jibun Techo. Okay, so aside from the look, there are some other overall features that are similar and some that are different. So the first thing is the paper. One of the things that these have in common is that they all use Tomoe River paper, which is a big plus. It's amazing paper. That's one of the things that people really like about the Hobonichi. So if you like Tomoe River paper, then the Jibun Techo also is for you because it's got the same paper. And as far as I can tell, it feels like it's about the same thickness. Sometimes I think that the Jibun Techo might be slightly thicker, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen anywhere what the thickness is. The Hobonichi paper is 52 GSM, I believe. This I don't know, but if it's not exactly the same, it's similar. And in terms of quality, they seem identical to me. The feeling is quite similar. So I think if you like the Hobonichi paper, you'll like this paper as well. The other main differences, I would say, are the colors and the font. So if you're familiar with the A5 and the A6 Hobonichi, you know that like they're quite understated in terms of design. So for example, for the monthly spread, you just have black and white with pink for weekends and or Sundays and holidays. And then in the weekly spread, it's also the same very understated palette. There's not much color going on at all. And then in the daily spreads, you get a different color per month, and there's quite a range of different colors, which is something that I really like about the Hobonichi. So you get all different kinds of blues, browns, purples, turquoise, orange, pink, red, etc. So there's quite a range of colors, but they're all pretty understated. They're on the dotted grids, and then, you know, they're here and here, but it's relatively subtle. That's true for the A5 and the A6, and for the weeks, it's just black and white with red for Sundays and holidays. So this has a very plain color palette. The Jibun Techo, on the other hand, has a lot more color used throughout, so you can see just by flipping through here that in comparison to the Hobonichi, the color really stands out here. The one thing that I would say is that it makes much more use of color, but it has a much more restricted palette. So it uses the same few colors over and over again, and they kind of cycle through them. So you have pink, blue, orange, gray, green, and I think that's it. And then there are a couple of other colors that it uses for some things in the front, but for the main section of the planner, it just uses those few colors. So more use of color, but fewer colors, if that makes sense. Obviously, compared to the weeks, it's a lot more colorful. So if you were comparing the B6 Slim Jibun to the weeks, then, and you like color, then I'd say you would definitely want to go for the Jibun Techo, because it's the same size, but this is much more colorful. Now, in terms of font, this is another thing that is very different, and I think it's really quite striking. So the Hobonichi, all three Hobonichis have the same font or a similar font, which is some kind of sans serif font. It looks to me kind of like Calibri or Arial, not quite, but it's something along those lines. It's very clean, understated, streamlined. The Jibun Techo has a completely different font. It has what I think of as like a robot font, or a kind of old computer printout, like from the DOS era type font. And I think this is another area where it really is down to personal preference. I prefer the Hobonichi font. I don't like the robot font. I think that's like one of the main things that sort of makes me prefer the Hobonichi to the Jibun Techo, is like, I don't know, there's just something about this font that I don't like, but this is absolutely personal preference, because as soon as James saw this, he said, oh, that robot font is amazing. So I think there's some people who really like this and will see it as a positive, whether there are others who would prefer a different type of font. So I think in terms of the aesthetics, those are the main differences as far as I'm concerned. The other thing is that the layout in a lot of the Jibun Techo is much busier and has more going on than the Hobonichi, but we'll get into that in a minute. The other obvious difference is in the layouts. So the A5 and A6 Hobonichi have yearly, monthly, and daily layouts, and the A5 also has a weekly layout. And then the weeks has yearly, monthly, and weekly layouts, and then it also has a lot of blank note paper. Whereas the Jibun Techo has yearly, monthly, and weekly layouts. It doesn't have the daily layouts. It does have blank note paper. That's what this third book is for. So this one that's called Idea, it's just blank, well, gridded note paper. So If you are looking for a daily layout and you'd like it to be dated, then the Jibun Techo is definitely not the one to go for because it doesn't have that at all. For that you need the A5 or the A6 Hobonichi. If on the other hand you're mainly interested in a weekly layout and you don't really care about the daily, then the Jibun Techo is great because it's much more lightweight, especially if you take out these two books, the Life book, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the Idea book, and you just use the planner itself. This is just a weekly layout. So if you compare this to, say, the Hobonichi, the A5, you have the weekly layout here. It's all of this section that's shaded in gray. That's the weekly layout. The rest of this is daily. So a lot of people say, I like the Hobonichi, but I just don't use the daily pages. And it's such a big chunk of the planner that's a real shame. And it's so heavy and it's not the most portable. So if you like the idea of a vertical weekly layout, but you don't use the daily pages, then the Jibun Techo is definitely worth considering because it's like they've just taken that section of the Hobonichi and put it into a planner by itself. So it's much more portable, much more lightweight. So, and that goes for whether you like the A5 Slim or the B6 Slim. So, with the B6 Slim, with the weeks, you've got a weekly layout. You have this week on one page and then blank pages. So in that respect, these are more similar, except that this one doesn't have all of the notes paper that the Weeks does built into the same book. It's got it in the other book, the Idea book. Okay, so moving on to the insides. The 3 books in the Jibun Techo are comprised of the planner, which I've already mentioned, the Idea pad, which is the blank book, and then this one called Life. And the idea of this is that this is supposed to be a book that you use for the rest of your life, hence the name. So it's got things in it that are supposed to be permanent, like anniversaries and birthdays. It has a world travel map, which I think is really cool, and it's green and pixelated, so it's going with this futuristic, or alternatively, I guess, old-fashioned pixelated robot kind of design. And I think it looks really cool in this world map. And then it also has this section called My News, and it starts with age 0 and it goes till age 99. So it's really supposed to be like a diary where you record momentous events that happen throughout your whole life, and you're never supposed to change it. You're just supposed to have this one life book that's with you forever. So this is quite a difference in style because there's nothing like that in any of the Hobonichis, really. So if you don't want this, or you feel like you don't need it, you can just take it out, and then you've just got the planner, the weekly planner, and the Idea book, which is a notepad. And so, like I said, if you feel like you don't need the Idea pad, then you can just take that out, and then you just have this weekly planner. And you can see how slim this is compared to either the A6 Hobonichi or the A5. Obviously, I haven't mentioned that the Hobonichi also has a VEC versions, which are half the year, which do make it quite a bit slimmer. But if you want to have the whole year together, then the Jibun Techo is definitely the way to go, because look how slim that is, and you see how floppy and bendable it is. This is not going to be much of a burden if you wanted to carry it around with you. Add to the fact that if you're looking at the A5 Slim, this is what it looks like compared to the A5 Hobonichi. You've got the whole year's worth of weekly layouts, and it's just tiny. So that is something to consider. But the Life book is this like kind of life record. Okay, so you've got that. Then, just put this back in. We go on to the planners themselves. So the other feature of the Jibun Techo that's different from the Hobonichis is that it has a lot more extra material. So, leaving aside the Life book, they all start with a yearly spread. So this is just a yearly calendar on 2 pages, but there is a difference. Beside the design, which we've already talked about, the Jibun Techo has 4 years. It has the previous year, the current year, and then the next 2 years. Whereas the Hobonichis, and this is true for all 3 of them, have the current year on 1 page and then a half page each for the previous year and the following year, so they don't have 2 years from now. which I am personally fine with. I think I would prefer to have the current year on a bigger page, like have a page to itself rather than have an extra year in the future. But again, this is personal preference. It depends on what job you do. Like I know some people do have to plan 2 years in advance for events and things like that, whereas I don't think I've ever had to check something 2 years in advance. But this is a minor difference. They both have the same thing basically. And then they both have a vertical yearly spread by month. There's a big difference here between the Jibun Techo and the Hobonichi Cousin in that in the Jibun Techo this is just a 2-page spread, so you get 6 months per year and the boxes are quite narrow. Whereas in the Cousin it's spread over 4 pages, so you get 3 months per page, and so they're about twice the width. If you see, this is April in the Hobonichi compared to April in the Jibun Techo. But the Hobonichi only gives you 1 line per day, whereas the Jibun Techo gives you 2 lines per day, so it probably evens out more or less. And it depends on what you want to use it for. So I use this as an index for the daily pages, and so I like having more space to write on the same line because I usually only have 1 topic per page. But sometimes the topics can be a little bit long, you know, like you see here, you have 2 words or 3 words. But if you use this for tracking, for example, then it depending on what you're tracking, it might be okay having less space but 2 lines. In terms of how it matches up with the weeks, the Jibun Techo is identical because the weeks also has a 2-page spread. So it's more similar to that in terms of size. So remember, this is A5 Slim and this is B6 Slim. So the Jibun Techo is a bit bigger, but presumably the B6 Slim Jibun Techo would be the same as this. The other thing that all of these planners have in common that I should mention, it's very important, is that they all have a grid box system. So all of the paper is filled with little dotted grid boxes. So that's true for the Jibun Techo and all of the Hobonichis. So that's another thing that makes them similar to each other. I think that the 2 things that really make them resemble each other are the Tomoe River paper and the grid box layout of everything. Everything is on grid, so you might not be able to see it here, but this is all little tiny grids, just like the Hobonichis. Okay, so then we start to get into some differences, more serious differences that go beyond layout. So the Hobonichis, all 3 of them, go straight into the month on 2-page spreads. Whereas the Jibun Techo has a whole bunch of other stuff that that partially corresponds to what you find at the end of the Hobonichis. So for example, it has this age chart, which shows you, like how old you'd be if you were born in a certain year. And you get this in the end of the Hobonichis, but it's here in the beginning. This one is really colorful. This uses a lot of different colors. I think this is a beautiful layout. I don't know why they didn't use all of these colors elsewhere in the planner, because it's almost rainbow colored. I really like it. So that is just in a different place, but then you get a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't have at all anywhere in the Hobonichi. So this spread is called My Dream. Then you have Money Plan, which is like a yearly budget. You don't get that in the Hobonichi. Then you have a sample weekly plan, which I think is a great idea. So this just gives you a sample weekly layout, and to me, this is ideal for routines. So anything that you do on a weekly basis, you can just fill it all in here, as I've done, and then instead of having to copy it over and over again every week, you can just look at this. So I think that's a really good feature, and that's one that you don't get in any of the Hobonichis. Then you have a map of Japan, which is again the same pixelated robot design that I really like. And then you have a bunch of other spreads: favorite phrases, recommendation list, book list, movie list, gifts received and given, promise list, and then a couple of blank spreads. So all of these have the grids and they're shaded on alternate lines, so you can really use them for all kinds of different things. Effectively, you could just ignore the titles and use them for recording all kinds of other things if you wanted to. And the Hobonichis do have gridded pages in the back. the A5 and A6 have a few gridded pages each, and the Weeks obviously has tons of gridded pages in the back, which you could use in a similar way, but this just gives you all of this stuff up front and it gives you some ideas of how to use them. Then, this is another feature that you don't get in any of the Hobonichis, and I think this is really nice, and you can see again how the use of color comes into it in the Jibun Techo. So, you get half a page per month, and it starts in November of the previous year. So, this is another important difference. The Jibun Techo only comes out once a year as far as I know, and it has a January start. Whereas the Hobonichis all come out twice a year. You can get a January start or an April start. So with the January start Hobonichis, they give you a monthly layout for December of the previous year, whereas this starts in November of the previous year. So it actually gives you 2 extra months. You can start using it 2 months early, which is amazing for planner addicts. So that's why this starts in November 2016. So this is a January 2017 start planner. So this, to me, seems ideal for tracking. It gives you 2 boxes going horizontally per day, and then it dates each of the days, and then it gives you a space to put in a title. So you could use this for, to me, I can't think of anything else that it would be ideally suited for other than tracking, because there's really not enough space in here to write anything except if it was like a 1-letter abbreviation. But I think it's a really, really cool spread, and it goes for the whole year, so it actually takes up quite a few pages. And then you go into the month on 2-page spread. So all of this stuff from, let's see, from here onwards, all of this is stuff that you don't have in the Hobonichi, except I think the age chart and the GIFs, which are in the back of the Hobonichis. But there's a whole bunch of extra layouts in here. So again, like depending on whether you think you'd use these or not, I could see for some people that this would be really, really convenient to have, especially things like the budget and this tracker, which you don't have in the Hobonichi. So you could like kind of manually set one up yourself, but it's very nice to have it here. But then if you don't think you would use it, it's just wasted space, I guess. So it really kind of depends on what you want to use this for. So for the month on 2-page spreads, they are quite similar except for the layout, with one difference, and that is that you can see the Jibun Techo gives you 6 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that if you have a month that, let's say, starts on a Sunday and has 31 days, you'll never end up with a situation where you have a half box at the bottom, in comparison to the Hobonichi, which only gives you 5 full boxes. So if you have a week like, a month like this, you see this 31 is in a half box, so that will never happen in the Jibun Techo. And I think that that's quite a nice feature. It's a small detail, but it's the sort of thing that bugs some of us planner addicts if you get a half box or a split box. So I think that's quite nice that they have it laid out so that you always have a full box for every day. And they all give you, just show you the weeks as well, they all give you this little column on the left for notes. So the only difference between them is that in the Hobonichis there is nothing here. There's just the usual the usual gridded boxes, whereas in the Jibun Techo they give you a little check box every other line, and they also give you some check boxes down at the bottom. The Hobonichis, the Weeks gives you 4 check boxes here. The Hobonichi doesn't give you any check boxes. So I actually prefer it. The Hobonichi used to give you some check boxes up here, and this year they took them out, and I actually like it better without them because I feel like it's freer. I like the idea of having check boxes, but the thing that kind of annoys me is that if you only get a checkbox every other line, what if you're only writing in short things and you want to put one on every line? Then you have to draw one in yourself every other line, and then it looks uneven because some of them are printed and some of them are handwritten. So I would rather that they just left it blank, and then I can decide if I want to put checkboxes in or not. But that's just me again, and it's a very, very small detail. It's easy to ignore this if you don't want to use them. So the only other difference is that the Jibun Techo has these little mood tracker icons. And this is something that we'll see again in the weekly spread. So Hobonichi doesn't have that. If you can see those there, it has like 3 little faces so you can track your mood per day, which I think is a nice feature because a lot of people in the planner community do track moods. So the other difference is that you can see down here, it gives you a little snapshot of the previous month and the following month, as well as the current month, which I personally don't really find the need for, but it's something that a lot of planners do, so there must be people that do use that. I'm quite happy with this emptier layout. I think that this is one of the big differences overall between these two brands, is that the Jibun Techo has a lot more going on. So you can see that in this monthly spread with the icons and the colors and the check boxes and the little calendars in comparison to the Hobonichi, which is quite plain. And I like the plainness and the understatedness of the Hobonichis because I feel like there's more space for you to do what you want with it. And because it's got the check boxes, I feel like they kind of allow you to do anything. But if you like these features, then it's much nicer to have them. So something that they all have in common is they all give you all of the monthly spreads first before going on to the weekly spread. So this is something that I really like. And maybe that's just because I'm kind of so used to the Hobonichi that I can't imagine any other way. But I prefer to have all of the monthly spreads and know where they are and have them all in the same place and then go into the weekly spreads and then the daily spreads rather than having them interspersed. I think that this is another thing that kind of divides the planner community, because I know that there are people who say that it really bugs them having all the months together and they want to have them with the weeks, and I think that this just depends on how you use them. So I use the monthly spreads in quite a different way than I use the weekly spreads, so I don't need to have them together. I just want to know, here are my months, and I really like that. So this, if you like that, then any of these planners is good for you. In terms of forward planning, the Jibun Techo gives you until March of the following year, so it gives you until March of 2018. And the Hobonichi, let me look at this one because this is a January start, so they'll be comparable. My cousin is an April start. I think it's the same. Yeah, it also gives you until March. Something that the Hobonichi does, which I think is a nice touch that the Jibun Techo doesn't do, is that it labels the following year. So it says 2018 in grey here, and that's because there's also March of 2017, and that's the main year of the planner, right? This is a 2017 planner. So in order to avoid confusion, just in case you open to March, didn't see the little 2018 here and started writing things in for 2017, this is supposed to help stop that happening, which I really like because I have actually done that before. So this doesn't have that. But again, it's a very small difference. Okay, so the other difference, I guess, is that the Jibun Techo has this little monthly tab here, which, yeah, see, every month it gives you a little monthly tab on the side, which the Hobonichi doesn't do in the monthly spreads. Okay, so then we move over into the weekly spreads in the case of these two and this one. So obviously this one is a little bit different because it doesn't have the weekly spreads, except if you buy the separate booklet. Okay, so this is what a weekly spread looks like, and again it starts at the beginning of November the previous year, which is fantastic because it gives you a whole bunch more time to use it if you buy it early. The Hobonichi the week starts at the beginning of December. So, see, this one starts on the 28th of November, so it starts a whole month later than this one. And this one starts even later. It starts the week of the 1st of January, if it's a January start. So like, say, the Monday of that week was December 28th or something, that's when it would start. So this is the best one to go for if you want to start early. Now, I think that this is where you see a lot of resemblances, but then you also have a lot of differences in the layout. So first of all, these two, resemble each other the closest because they're both vertical layouts. The weeks is a little bit different because it's this week on one page and then blank page layout. So this is not really as comparable. So if you like this size and you got the B6 Slim, as far as I understand, I could be wrong, but I've looked everywhere and I haven't seen anything saying that the B6 Slim has a different layout than this. So as I understand it, if you had the B6 Slim, you'd have this size but a vertical weekly, which I think could be quite appealing. Because if you have appointments and you'd like to have a timeline, then it's very nice having this kind of vertical layout. Or if you like making lists and you like having everything listed vertically. So if you like this size but not this layout, then I think the B6 Slim of this would be ideal for you. But don't hold me at my word to that because I've never actually seen the B6 Slim and I've looked for pictures and I haven't been able to find anything conclusively guaranteeing that it's the same layout, although I think that it is. So just double check if you're going to get the B6 Slim. But if we put this aside, these two are very similar because they both have this vertical week on 2 pages. And, you know, some things they have in common, like they give you equal space for every day, including the weekends, which is totally a deal breaker for me. So I love that. So if you like having equal space for the weekends, then either of these will be fine. Monday start, and the monthly calendars are also a monthly start for all of these, which is standard in Japan and Europe. They also both give you this space at the side here that you can use for notes. Again, the Hobonichi doesn't give you checkboxes, whereas the Jibun Techo does. And like I said, I prefer having it blank, but it can be useful having these checkboxes, and they do give you a whole bunch of checkboxes. It's one every other line. The Jibun Techo and the Hobonichi both have a little calendar here, but the Jibun Techo gives you 2 months. So you see there it has one, I think that's October, and then it also gives you November, and I think that's because this week goes over 2 different months, so it's giving you both of them, whereas the next week, which is only in November, it's just giving you the 1 month. So the main differences are the color, which I've already mentioned, and there's some other differences in the layout that I'll go into more. So in terms of color, the Jibun Techo is kind of cool because it labels all of the weekdays of a particular month one color. So November is green, and you can see that it matches with the little tab here on the side, whereas December is pink. So this week has some days in November and some days in December, so you've got the green and the pink, and then it's got both of them on the side. And Saturday's always blue and Sunday's always orange. Holidays are also orange. Japanese public holidays are orange. So you can see that you instantly, it's kind of color coded. So you've got your week, which is one color, and then you've got Saturday and Sunday in a different color. Whereas the Hobonichi is just blank, and then Sundays and holidays are colored in red and Saturdays are in navy. I think this is navy. It's always hard for me to decide if it's navy or like very sort of dark gray, but I think it's navy. Anyway, so like I said, this is much sparser, less colorful, less going on. That's one difference. And another difference is that obviously because this is a true A5 and this is an A5 Slim, the columns in this are wider, so you can fit more on the line. And then another difference is that this has a lot more icons. So you see at the top you've got these weather icons, so you can circle what the weather is like. And you also have these mood tracking icons down at the bottom, and then you have these 3 little icons here for meals. So there's one for breakfast, one for lunch, and one for dinner. Which, again, I think it depends on your preference. I kind of like the fact that this is blank because I use this for my work planner, so I don't do mood tracking or meal planning in here. And I also don't do weather tracking. So like none of that is useful to me. So I would prefer just to have the blank space to use for notes. Whereas if you're using this for your, say, overall planner or personal planner, or what, you know, whatever that you did want to track those things, I could see how it would be fantastic to have them all written in for you. So I think again, it's like totally up to you and what you're using this for. It's just that this has a lot more built into it. And my friend who gave me this planner said that this is designed kind of to be more reflective, so it has a lot of journaling elements, and that's why it has the mood tracking and also the life book and the idea book. There's like kind of more of an emphasis on reflection and journaling, whereas this one is just, it's more open-ended and it doesn't really like kind of push you in any particular direction. So in terms of the timeline, they both have a fantastic timeline, but they're quite different. So the Hobonichi has a timeline starting at 6 a.m. and going until midnight, and it gives you 2 lines per hour. And for me, that's perfect. I get annoyed with planners that stop at like 7 or 8 p.m. or even 10 p.m. because often I have things going later than that, and I like to be able to mark them. Like say evening classes, or if you go to the cinema or something like that. But I don't have anything later than midnight that I have to put in my planner. And not before 6 a.m. because I hate getting up early. However, I have heard people say that even this, which is quite long by planner timeline standards, is not long enough. And so for those people, I say, look no further than the Jibun Techo, because this has the most incredible timeline I've ever seen. It is a true 24-hour timeline. Technically, the daily pages in the Hobonichi A5 and A6 have a 24-hour timeline, but I don't think it's very useful because it only gives you 1 line per hour, and it only indicates the number every 3 hours. And it's very squished. This is in the cousin, but it's the same size as the timeline is in the A6 daily pages. And I feel like if you really wanted to do detailed daily planning or tracking, I feel like it would be very difficult to do it in this very squished timeline. Whereas this one is what I would think of as a true proper 24-hour timeline, because it starts at midnight up here. Starts at midnight with the 0, and then it goes up until the following midnight, where it says 24, if you can see that. And it's really cool because it gives you 1 line per hour between midnight and 7 a.m. Then it gives you 2 lines per hour until midnight. So you could actually use this if you had things going on at night, or like you work night shifts, or you want to track sleeping hours or something like that. You could absolutely use this, and it's really convenient. I used it to track sleeping hours for a while, and it was great for that. So I think that this is an amazing timeline, and it actually is very practical. The other cool thing about it, which is not so practical if you live outside of Japan, but is still kind of interesting, is that it shades in the nighttime hours. So it actually changes with the year, and this is based on Japanese time zone. So if you live outside Japan, it's not going to be hugely useful for you, but it indicates what time the sun sets and what time the sun rises. So even if you live outside of Japan, it's still going to give you something of an idea. Like this is basically, nighttime, and this is daytime. So I think that's a cool feature that the Hobonichi doesn't have. And then other than that, the only other difference is that it divides the day into a few different sections. So it puts a solid line at 7, at 12, and at 6 p.m. whereas the Hobonichi is just blank. So I think the idea is that like from midnight until 7 a.m. those are the nighttime sleeping hours, 7 until 12 are the morning hours, 12 until 6 are like I guess the afternoon work hours, and then 6 until midnight are the evening nighttime hours, whereas in the Hobonichi there's nothing there. So this is, again, it's much more structured. And I think that can be either a positive or a negative. So you might like to have it really clearly divided. Like this is the morning, this is the afternoon, this is the evening. It almost makes it more like the Happy Planner, the Erin Condren, where they divide the day into sections. So I think that that is quite an interesting tool that you could use. Whereas this one is just open. So, if you wanted to, you could make the lines yourself, but it can be kind of nice having them there already. But alternatively, like for me, I don't really care about that. I just want to have the timeline. So I'd rather have it look cleaner and less cluttered. But I like them both. So the other thing is that the Jibun Techo, see, you can see that these are both exactly the same height. And this line is pretty comparable. So above the line in the Jibun Techo, this starts higher, because in the Hobonichi you have all this blank space at the top before you get the name of the day. Here they use that for the weather icons, and you have these 2 little lines here. In the Hobonichi it's blank, but then where they have like midnight until 6 a.m. in the Hobonichi you get your top 3 checklist, or whatever you want to use it for, meal planning, or just 3 boxes. this doesn't have those 3 boxes. So instead, you have these 2 lines which you can use for something. And you can also obviously use the midnight until 7 a.m. portion here for checklists, to-dos, focus of the day, etc. Because often, you know, people aren't doing anything in those hours. And then at the bottom, you can see that the Jibun Techo timeline finishes much earlier. I mean, much further up the page than the Hobonichi one does. So this is midnight. And you can see that midnight in the Hobonichi is way down here. And that is because at the bottom here, you get this blank space for notes. And then you get the mood tracker. And then you get the meal planning. Whereas in the Hobonichi, you only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think, lines worth for notes. Here you get 1, that's midnight, so you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then all of this other stuff. So you could use all of these extra lines for notes as well and ignore the mood and the meal planning. But because they're there, you get like kind of one less box, if you see what I mean, on the left. So like these are the ones that are sort of designed for note-taking, I assume. And that's kind of comparable to these 7 down here, if that makes sense. So the timelines sort of like don't add up. Other than that, they are pretty similar. I think they're the most similar layouts that I've seen in planners, in that they both have a very long timeline and they give you half an hour per line, which I think is really nice. And they just carry on like that. And then the next big difference that you get, obviously, is that the Jibun Techo then ends. So you get all of your weeklies, and it goes till the 2nd week of January of the next year. So January 2018, it gives you 2 weeks of that. The Hobonichi, I think, just gives you 1 week. So this is the spring cousin, so it ends at the end of March, and it doesn't actually give you any extra time. The 1st of April is here, and that's when it ends. So I think that this gives you an extra week, or possibly even an extra 2 weeks for forward planning, which you probably don't need, because if you become a Jibun Techo addict, then you will have bought the next one way before that and started using it in November. So you don't really need this, but it's quite nice to have it just in case you do have forward planning to do. And then it's got this spread looking back on 2017. So it gives you 4 lines per year twice. So you could use this one for, you could either use them as a kind of like continuous horizontal spread, or you could use this page for one thing and this page for something else. So again, this is kind of designed for reflection, whereas the Hobonichi doesn't give you that per se. Instead, it gives you this 2-page blank spread, and it says turning the page. So you could use this for reflection, or you could use it for goals for the start of the year, because then you go into the daily pages. So again, this is much more open, which I kind of like. It doesn't give you the months, it doesn't give you the shading, it just gives you blank grid paper. So I sort of like the idea of this, but I think in practice I prefer having it left open so that I can decide what to do with it. But again, like, this is just, it depends on what you want to use it for and what appeals to you. And then the Jibun Techo has a map of Tokyo trains and like different trains for different Japanese cities. And then it has world time differences, which I quite like having in the end of the planner. And again, I really like this pixelated design. And then it's got a page for personal data, and that's it. And then the Hobonichi then goes into the daily pages, and you have your monthly index, and then you have a day per page going until the very end of the year. And then it has a timetable and various lists, which you can see in more detail in a video that's devoted to the Hobonichi, but it's got some of that, and that's it. So with the weeks, you have your weekly spreads, which then go until the end of the year. I think it may give you 1 more week. In this case, it doesn't in 2017. So the Jibun Techo actually gives you an extra 2 weeks. And then it gives you 72 pages of notes and a little index, and these are numbered and they're just blank. And then it has the same kind of end stuff that you have in the A5 and A6. So with the daily pages and the notes pages, the Jibun Techo does have a counterpart to that in the idea pad. So the idea is, that you use this as your planner, and then if you want blank notes pages, if you want to make lists, do bullet journaling, or have more detailed daily planning, then you can use this. And it's got a little box for page numbers, but it doesn't actually number the pages itself. It has little boxes at the top and the bottom of each page. So I think this has probably about, I'd say 60 to 80 pages, and it's also Tomoe River paper. It's very similar to the Hobonichi memo notebooks, if you are familiar with those, but I think it has more pages and they're not perforated. So the idea is you can use these and then change them out as often as you need to. So in effect, as long as you don't want it to be predated and you don't necessarily need it to last for the whole year, you can use this booklet in the same way that you would use the blank pages in the weeks or the daily pages in the A5 or A6. So I think as long as you don't mind the idea of it being in a separate book, then that's absolutely fine. You do get the same functionality. It's just that if you want to use these as daily pages, they won't last you for the year and you have to date them yourself. So I think some people mind that, some people don't. I prefer to have everything in one book, like I said, and I like to be able to take it at the end of the year and just put it on the shelf and archive it. And I would feel a bit funny with this, having the one planner here, the weekly planner, and then having all of my daily notes in a collection of a few different booklets and having to order more booklets, because I pretty much use all of the notes pages in my cousin, all of the daily pages for notes and detailed daily planning, depending on the day. And so I know that I would go through, like, say 3 or 4 of these in a year, and I would prefer to have it all in one book. So that's one of the main reasons why I prefer the cousin as a work planner. And I'm comparing these because these are the same size, and what I was thinking of using this for, if I were to switch over, would be for a work planner. And I think another reason that I like the Hobonichi better is because of the layout being so much more clean and streamlined, and I also am really attached to the colors and the font, and I think aesthetically that I just prefer that look to the look in the Jibun Techo. But things that I really like about the Jibun Techo are the 24-hour clock. I just think that that is fantastic, and there's no real downside to it, because if you don't use these hours because you're asleep, you can use it for extra notes. So I think that's, that's not an issue, because sometimes in the weekly pages of the Hobonichi, if it's quite a busy day with a lot of to-dos, I run out of space in each day. So this is, I think, somewhere where the Jibun Techo, that's a real advantage. I think that's, like, fantastic. Other than that, though, I feel like personally for me, the Hobonichi has everything that the Jibun Techo has, and then it has more, and I like the layout better. So I think if it's a, kind of like a consideration of all of those factors, I would definitely go with the Hobonichi. The only other thing I can think of is that if you can't stand the idea of carrying around this, like, big heavy A5 planner, but you like the idea of having the whole year together, and so you don't want to go for the avec, which is 6 months. The same thing as the cousin, but 6 months. Because for me, I know that is the reason that I decided not to go for the avec, because I want to have the whole year together. Then this is very appealing, because you could have the whole year and you could also have the idea pad, and it would be so much more lightweight and portable. So I think that is a really major appealing factor, and in fact this was something that was kind of making me entertain the idea of switching over to the Jibun Techo, just because it would be so much lighter to carry around. I would have taken out the life book and then I would have just had these two. But ultimately it's the design and the layout and the fact that I really like having all of the daily pages for the whole year together that made me decide to stick with the Hobonichi cousin as a work planner. For the weeks, that is a different matter, because I like the idea of having a vertical layout for a personal planner. And so if the B6 slim size is really the same as the weeks, then, I mean, if the B6 slim size, which is the same size as the weeks, still has this vertical layout, then I think that that is quite appealing. But again, I still prefer the layout of the Hobonichi, although I do really like the colors. So I'm not sure. In the future, I would consider possibly switching over from the Weeks to the Jibun Techo in B6 slim size for a personal planner, but I'm so attached to the Hobonichi that I find it really hard to imagine actually doing that. So I hope this is helpful. I know this has been a really long video, but I wanted to get everything in so that you would have a very thorough comparison. So if there's anything that I haven't covered that you're interested in, please let me know. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.